I would focus on ransomware as a service, and I would tell you these are the profit-sharing groups. Do they do data encryption, data exfiltration? They do different things, but what they essentially do, they work together to extort the victim.
The essential thing is, money for data. They're all criminals, but they all regulate in a certain way. You behave a certain way. If you don't fulfill your end of the bargain to your affiliates, you're not paying people. All that stuff gets out and it ruins their reputation.
All right, we're back. This is Dan Berthet, your host. I'm IT Security Director for Bitdefender, and I have with me Sean Nickel and Martin Zucek, and we're going to be talking about ransomware. And before I dive into what ransomware is, along these fine individuals, I'll go ahead and I'll ask them talk a little bit about themselves, to introduce themselves. So, Martin, go ahead. Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Martin Zucek. I'm based in the US. I'm Technical Solutions Director at Bitdefender. I had few different responsibilities, different teams, but my favorite thing is I'm kind of the popular scientist of the company. So I work a lot about the education, what we are seeing in our data, in our investigations and so on. So that is my favorite part of the job, working with labs and helping them to publish the research.
Sean.
Yeah,
a couple of things.
Absolutely. I'm Sean Nickel. I'm also based in the US with the Bitdefender MDR service. I'm the team lead for the cyber threat intelligence team that supports MDR, along with some of our MDR customers. Been doing a lifetime of intelligence work and playing in the cybersecurity space for almost a decade now. Love to help out with Martin's mad scientist initiatives and kind of doing good things for security out there and supporting our SOC.
So you guys are wildly familiar with ransomware, right? It's something, you have a couple of stories about. So, stupid question. What is it? Martin, what is ransomware? I'm going to cut you off. I have a small intro. Here's the thing. Like in my background of IoT, I know I found 200 separate definitions for what IoT is. So I kind of want to get it out of the way and be like, okay, is there multiple understandings of what ransomware is and how does it work? Or like, is, the professional scene looking at it from different angles that we want to explore? Yeah, walk me through that.
2025 is going to be a year of ransomware, because so is like every year is a year of ransomware. Yeah, but it's changing. So you see different definitions because some people keep repeating definition that was valid like 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Other people keep adapting it, saying like, hey, this year is actually quite different. So it is changing. Yeah.
What's our best definition that we want to put forward that we're going to have a, work out of?
The definition I would use, I would focus on ransomware as a service, and I would tell you these are the profit-sharing groups. Do they do data encryption, data exfiltration? They do different things, but what they essentially do, they work together to extort the victim.
Yeah, essentially it's payment for data. However it is, it's either you're paying to decrypt your data, you're paying to get it back, paying to keep them from stopping from publishing the data. So a couple different ways, but yeah, the essential thing is, money for data.
Money for data. So let's just, we can probably safely agree that most of the situations, the process is, there's some sort of a deployment of a malware that, encrypts data.
That's why I'm saying it's changing. So,
right, but like, let's just say there's the attack itself encrypts data.
No.
And
no, that's why I'm
that's
saying
not
no.
true.
Because, okay, think about it this way. We started with ransomware, which was very simple. You got email, you open something, your machine is encrypted, you pay, I don't know, $100. Then we had the next stage, which is you attack the whole company. Yeah, you don't go after one machine, you go after the whole network. Then we started having double extortion, which was always presented. We encrypt your data. We also steal it. We ask for more money. And kind of people started repeating this definition. Then we have the next stage, which was double extortion, where we steal your data, but we also encrypt it. And today, in many, many cases, we have pretty much just, we steal the data and that's it. There is no malware. There is no encryption. And if you would see the graph of how it was going, like exfiltration is the more common and the more dangerous.
Exactly. So this is what I'm trying to get. Like, if we're looking at the space, what's my scare as an organization, for example? What am I looking at? What's gonna happen to me if I run into ransomware, and how am I supposed to act on protecting my data?
I would go after maybe think about it this way. It depends on what kind of company you are. Yeah. So you are manufacturing, you care about availability, you don't want to shut down operations. So data encryption is critical for your business. You are in healthcare, legal services, and so on. You have like few machines, like they shut down, you restore, but the data of your clients or the business contacts, like that's much higher value. So it's very individual, like what is the core of your business? That is the part that you should be like really.
So let me ask you this. So for Sean, you could possibly touch on this as well. So if that data exfiltration is the concern, then I need to deal with this in a separate environment rather than just, hey, I just want access to my own data. That was the common conception, right? It's just this stuff gets encrypted. I need to get back to my business. I'll pay a sum of money, potentially, obviously, usually in crypto. And then if these guys are meeting their end of the deal, they're, make me have access to my data. Again, I'll keep going about my business. So I was going to touch base on that a little bit, and I was going to be like, okay, how many situations like these the attacker keep their end of the bargain? Do you have a number to put on that? I'm trying to understand this space, right? We're trying to paint a picture. So how many times an attack like this happened and they actually met their
It's kind of interesting because there's an entire ecosystem behind it. You have like what they call the initial access brokers that are oftentimes getting the access in, and a lot of times it's nothing sexy. It could be something like an RDP that they exploited. It could be some random remote vulnerability or something. So the interesting thing about some of the ransomware actors out there, especially ones that are recruiting affiliates that are kind of public, a lot of them are very public in the fact that they engage on social media. They'll engage media, like the actual news media, recorders. There's a lot of kind of public personas that are out there that kind of represent some of these groups. And so for them, there's a bit of credibility and clout that they get. And if they get to be known as kind of a bad faith actor, they're already not getting, basically their public relations is done at that point. So, and there's a lot of self-regulation that happens on some of the forums out there where, it's, they're all criminals, but they all regulate in a certain way. You behave a certain way. If you don't fulfill your end of the bargain to your affiliates, you're not paying people, all that stuff gets out and it ruins their reputation. So they want to have a good reputation amongst their peers and then also on the outside. Because, if I'm a victim and I know that this guy has never been able to decrypt my stuff or has never honored anybody's payments,
exactly,
why pay?
Exactly.
So,
right.
Yeah, you want to have that.
So you really want to encourage the victim to pay, but at the same time, so we can touch base on this a little later as well, but I'm going to follow up and be like, okay, so when data exfiltration happens, what is to say that data, after I pay the second time, never really gets on the dark web or, lost somewhere else, but it shouldn't be? Because, I mean, we're talking, this is not a business in the conventional sense. It's a criminal activity. So, the trust is a different level of trust in the endeavors here. So, there's definitely, if I'm a victim, I don't know if I can trust the bad guy to, safeguard my data that they're asking, money out of me to protect. So I'm just trying to understand, the psychology of handling an issue like this from a standpoint of a victim, right?
Yeah.
You can't trust, like that. There are no guarantees, and like that's one of the shifts. So
because, for example, let me interject. While historically ransomware is associated with large organizations that were capable of pay, and usually the infrastructure like hospitals and schools and stuff or individuals was not necessarily targeted because, I don't want to say ethical reasons, but obviously you want to, it's just like
there's a PR problem with that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. It's just something that you don't generally touch.
Yeah.
And now that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
So it's an all-out war. This stuff is happening all over. So then that changes the paradigm completely. And, Okay. So
I said there is like historical reason, and it's something that I was thinking about like recently a lot. So here is the thing. Every single month we are releasing the threat debrief where we go, hey, these are the top 10 groups like this month. And we started doing this, I want to say 2020, 2021. And initially, like it used to be, there were periods of time where it was very boring because it was always the same list. Because what you had there is that you had, for example, Logbit. The malware they provided to you was exceptionally good. So that was the reputation. Affiliates had to work with this group because you really wanted to use the best malware that is on the market. And then like 2022, that was the Logbit leak.
Yeah.
So that was the big leak from the Logbit. We got access to all the conversations, internal chat systems, and so on. And media focused on like, hey, that's what they are talking about. Like, I want a vacation. Yeah, I talked to my manager. The big part of the leak was also the source code of it. So today, you want to start your own ransomware group. You already start with the code of one of the best groups that is freely available to you. So what we are seeing the last, what would you say, 4 or 5 months?
Yeah.
Is like all these top 10 groups are changing every month. Like new names are coming, disappearing, and so on. So it's different than it was before. And there is also pretty much like less control by the operators about the affiliates because they can just go to another group that has like the same quality.
So you mentioned the creators of the malware and then the affiliates, and let's revisit the map of how it works, right? So you have a group of creators that write the actual code, but they're not really the bad guys because they just wrote some code, right? They just wrote some malware. So maybe the bad guys are the affiliates, but then the affiliates take the more risk, the most of the risk. Or how does that walk me through? I know
Another loaded question.
And I'll just put it this way. So and this is the situation here where you work with Mark and Sean and all these amazing people that work in the industry who know everything about this stuff, and to them it's such a boring thing and normal thing to talk about these things. But again, I don't think they're that well known. So let's revisit how it works.
You want to take the first shot?
I mean, it's again, there's an ecosystem, and so you have these developers out there, and you'll stumble across things on on the web where it's like, this is for education purposes, this is a pen testing tool, all those different like things. So there's definitely indies out there that are kind of developing their own stuff. Maybe they get picked up by a group because it works, or they're developing things in house. I know Mark and I have talked about this a lot, where it's become more about targeting specific vulnerabilities, and there are several groups that have gotten really good at doing that. So they're either finding a 0-day or they're able to exploit something really fast, like a critical vulnerability that gets announced, and they know that organizations are not great at patching timely, and it's something we can sit in our ivory tower and cry about, but it's hard to patch, but at the same time people aren't reacting fast enough, and so there's all that happens, and plus a lot of these guys are kind of running themselves as a startup. They have all the functions there, and they run it as a business. I would say they're probably the ones that have survived the longest are probably the more business-like out of all of them. It's not a bunch of kids with RPGs. I forgot. Oh, Kevin Beaumont used to always talk about that. Like,
so would you say that some of the OGs maybe have retired by now? They're just leaving.
Oh,
good chance.
yeah, probably.
Leaving, making room for the newcomers.
Oh,
who are more
definitely.
thirsty. Geographically, where would you place these groups?
So let's go one step back.
Absolutely.
Which is, so again, like we are debunking some of the common misunderstandings. You will learn something new. My background is economy. That's what I studied. So for me, when I look at the ransomware, I'm like, what's the business model? What's the money flow? Like that tells you so much. And one of the most common like basic misunderstanding is like, oh, ransomware is a service, is like software as a service and so on. Like it's not. So if you want to understand how it works, it's pretty much cyber criminals adopting, they are the Ubers and Airbnbs of the criminal world.
So
It is the same business model. Like,
so that's a marketplace.
no, so it's more
Because right, we're talking about somebody provides the value, and there are a bunch of so that's the affiliates, right?
it's more in a way. So you have operators. That's the ransomware platform. Yeah, they develop the code. They have the portal. Often, most of them, I would say, still are like leading negotiations. Yeah. But then you have affiliates that are, again, like equivalent of the drivers.
The gig economy,
Operators.
model.
Yeah. So, and you need to understand like those two groups are different skills, different motivations. Like one of the very commonly misunderstood things is like who's getting most of the money. Yeah.
oh yeah.
That's
Who is getting most of the money?
who would you guess? Like based on what you are reading, you are like, hey, the log bits of the world, like those are the big names. And it's like the affiliates that are anonymous, they are 75, 80, 90% of the profit stays with them.
Because they take in the most risk, right?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. And then since it's such a large scale operation that impacts so many organizations around the world, there's plenty of money to be made at the operator level.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. If I'm the big guy and I got 10 affiliates, even that small percentage coming back to me is still good enough to get a Lamborghini in the garage. So
and pay the insurance for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Have a Dacia in Sochi,
Yeah, exactly. So it's fascinating that way. And how did this evolve over the years, and how's recently evolved into today? What's going on now?
So they are like different parts of ecosystem and tooling, and all of them are evolving, not independently, but like all these parts. So you go through the stages of attack. Initial attack, initial access is different now than it was in the past. Attack execution, different than in the past. So again, like all the pieces of this ecosystem, TTPs, operations, what they do, how they do it, changing all the time.
So since we're going to cover in a future webinar a lot more detail on the ins and outs of the current state of affairs and so on, what I'm trying to get out of here is how the landscape progressed and evolved, and what are we now, and how that's going to look over the next year or so, and maybe over the next 5 years. And specifically, since this is, and I'm going to let you reiterate, the biggest concern in cybersecurity today, I believe, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that kind of, it kind of, to Martin's point earlier, is every year there's been something different about the landscape, the way that it's been evolving. And one of the things I have been seeing is, there are several groups that are fairly long established that, they'll have rules on their blogs, and a lot of them are very detailed. Like there's like 20 or 30 bullet points of these are the things we don't and don't do. This is, you break this rule, if you pay with this kind of, crypto versus another kind, we'll give you a discount. Like, there's different timelines that they'll set for negotiations and all these different things. And, it used to be, like you said, there was, no targeting on infrastructure, no targeting government sector, no targeting healthcare, education, even stuff like no former Soviet Union, no axis of evil countries. So, North Korea or Iran.
CIS.
Yeah.
But we call the region CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States.
But some of those guardrails are getting removed, and especially some of these newer groups that are kind of popping up that have maybe a different regional focus or a different regional location. It's getting interesting because, we had, it was maybe 2 years ago, one of Lockbit's affiliates attacked a hospital, I believe, and Lockbit basically publicly said, "Hey, sorry, that was our affiliate. We've dealt with him. Here's all your stuff," and so, but I think now you're probably not going to run into that altruism nearly as much, or trying to have face. I think it's going to be a little bit more chaotic. So I think it's going to be interesting.
So from
there is one interesting thing for this, which is like you were saying, there were like ethical reasons. A little bit, maybe. There used to be some code of conduct, but the big part of it is this. Like, you are threat actor. Why are you doing this? You do it to get...
Oh, absolutely. Of course, like you're going to go where the money is. And of course, you have a lot of enterprise that's just sitting out there that's able to pay and lumply, and then you're not going to worry about ethics much.
Now, but you need to think about it one step more. You attack the company, okay? You start negotiating. Who is going to pay the ransom? Is it the company, or is it the cyber insurance company that they have? Yeah. Cyber insurance companies are trying to get more involved in negotiations. So they are going to ask you, who is the group that attacked you? And they are going to tell you, yes, we will pay it. Or they will say, no, we will not pay it. Because there are sanctions, for example, and it's illegal for us to pay. So for these groups, like the cyber insurance is actually important to understand. So for example, the same question before, like if there is group that you will pay and they will release the data even though you paid and so on, the next time that something like this happens, the cyber insurance for the next victim will say, it's waste of money, we will not pay for you.
And the company... Give me an example of how this plays out? Or a situation where the cyber insurance just didn't want to pay? Something that's notable that you can think of?
It's all individual. Yeah, it's different companies, different cyber insurances, different like it's business, essentially it's business decision always. To pay or not to pay, it's like business is going to decide.
Yeah. And I think the other part that's kind of a little troublesome is that, there's a lot of organizations aren't willing to go public with what happened with them. So it's like there's a lot of behind the scenes that I don't think we'll ever find out, other than maybe some random 8K tax filing or something that comes out. But there's a lot of things behind the scenes that it hurts. I think it hurts the blue teams because we don't necessarily always know how they got in or what we need to protect.
That is one of the cool, like, I want to say cool elements, but so what happened quite frequently is that you have leaks from the ransomware groups. We've seen this happening many times. And one of the most interesting data for me is like you have access to all the communications, you have access to the list of the victims. You look at the list of the victims and you look at the public breach disclosures of these companies. And then you figure out like this company was obviously attacked, paid a ransom. There was never public disclosure for them. So for leaks, like for me, this is really the interesting part to look at those data, because that's where you find out like, okay, they claim publicly this number of victims, and once you see inside, you realize like that list is.
So that's from you, from the cybersecurity professional. But do you think there's an implication out in business for the reputation of the particular company that was implicated in the thing? And I'll give you my angle here. So, for example, in a conversation that we have on, IoT vulnerabilities, we get a lot of questions from the media. I was like, okay, so this company had a bunch of disclosures. They had a lot of vulnerabilities that got fixed and patched, but this company had none. Which one would you trust? And they would lean towards the company that had none disclosed. And we've always told them that, from our perspective, if anybody that has been going through, the gutter, but has published and was upfront about things and was patching fast, was more trustworthy than the one that, there's obviously no guarantees. That's probably they're doing great, but I would normally, we would normally trust the people that were straightforward. So my question to you is, do you think out there in the real world, outside of the cybersecurity space, do you think that this actually has implications in the public space as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's, we saw just now, recently Charge Healthcare, with how many millions of records exposed and all these different things. And so to me, it kind of goes back to, how everything happened the way it did. Was it pure negligence, or were they staying up with stuff? Was it a 0 day that could have gotten anybody, or, a phishing attack that, probably could have happened to anybody,
Right.
or were they, had years and years of, vulnerabilities just stacked up that, you guys just weren't doing your thing,
Because, once this happens, like, I feel like what I'm trying to build here is an unsanctioned ad hoc list of maybe recommendations to how to handle the situation. If it was you to make a recommendation, what would you say? It happens, whatever reason, how do you handle it? What would you?
Oh, so you mean like, how do you respond like after breach?
Yeah.
Throughout and after, what would your expertise in the field how would you recommend the company organization approach a situation like this, and how they do publicize it? What's the best way to go about it? And it's a loaded question as well, I hope, because it also implies handling the attacker groups as well. So what's the best way to handle this?
Hire a negotiator immediately.
Where do you find a negotiator?
Cyber insurance company.
They would have one.
Very often you can ask your cyber insurance company like, hey, you notify them first, because again, like as I said, they will end up paying the bill very often. They will tell you never negotiate directly, because they are like, it's another, you just open like another can of worms where we could talk for 1 hour about.
We'll make another episode that we can get into the details.
I have actually a really good example of what's the mistake that you could make. Something that I was reading about yesterday. So let's say that you decided to handle the case yourself. Okay, you don't have cyber insurance. You are like, I will not pay even more for negotiating. I will talk to the guys. You talk to them. First of all, you don't know what to do, how you proceed, because what you want to do is you want to figure out what exactly they have. You want a proof of what they have. You want to prove that they can get access to that data, that they can decrypt it, because very often they will just like do the listing of files and they don't have it. They have just the listing. Yeah. But the story that I was telling about, like the small mistake that you can do, is what I heard about yesterday. So this was the scenario. IT or security department decided, like, we will negotiate on our own. They agreed on the payment. We are going to send it, it's going to be Bitcoin. They had a wallet, send the money. The wallet is public. So the first thing the ransomware group did is, let's have a look how much more they have left in the wallet. And they immediately charged them like twice as much. Yeah, and it's a small thing, like you would not think about it. Again, especially like this is high stress situation. Yeah, the clock is ticking, you need to do something. And these are like small things that you skip. And negotiator will tell you, like, we have like very well defined list that we can do. We are professional. We've done this many times.
So, Sean, you would, how does, so I'd imagine there's a collaboration between the insurance companies and cybersecurity companies and law enforcement and so on, and they understand and they know what the groups are and how they operate. So they're equally informed, right? They would have to, how does the cooperation work in this space briefly?
It's kind of interesting because going back to the rules that some of the groups have set, there are some that if they basically get any kind of indication that law enforcement's been involved, there's a few that will immediately cut negotiations and they'll dump everything right there. There are some that probably know that in some way that they're going to be involved, but it'll probably go back to who the actual negotiators, if they can maybe figure it out or things like that. So it's interesting. I think probably kind of getting ahead of, you talked about the public reaction, but it feels like some of the companies in the past that were very kind of upfront, like, hey, we're in the middle of an attack, trying to figure it out, on day one, hour one, versus waiting 3 weeks to be like, oh, by the way, I think there's definitely a different public perception with those companies that do that, but they're probably, the ones that are ahead of it are probably prepared for it. They have some kind of, disaster recovery plan. They have cyber insurance. They have a, DFIR company on retainer, whatever it is, that they probably had some stuff lined up and they're ready to go, and to me, it's that maybe they're in a better posture, but
is it worth waiting for a decryptor?
Oh, you mean like the crypto? Well, define what you mean as the crypto, because that can also mean different things.
Walk me through it.
So what do you get from the ransomware group after paying is called the crypto as well. Yeah. Then you have the cryptos that we, for example, are releasing. Like, we never go into details how we build them, how we can do them. The sad reality is this, we were successful in the past with the cryptos. That is very rare today. So they are making less and less mistakes. That's first of all. Second, again, you have leaked professional ransomware code. So you don't start from the beginning. You don't make mistakes. You don't have like software bugs. Your ground zero where you start new operation is already like professional service.
So because there's been some successful stories where, decryptors were made available, Bitdefender was part of releasing some of those, and billions of dollars were saved in the process, and, data was restored to affected organizations. I'm trying to understand if you would guess that there is some sort of feeling in the market that it's probably worth writing it out because there's been success.
That's unrealistic. That's
yeah.
highly,
What's your
like,
professional opinion on this? Right? Maybe statistics are not in anybody's favor, but like, let's clear it out, because again, successful situations existed, and maybe that will, sow some trust and optimism in a potential victim. Like, I'll just write it out.
I'd almost go on a sliding scale for that. If it's somebody that maybe kind of a junior developer, fresh and, still in school, or that wrote a ransomware code, I might maybe lean towards a decryptor then, because there could be mistakes. But if it's a long established, pretty well known, very professional and probably well paid group, I would probably steer clear and not, because they're getting complicated with the encryption itself.
So think about it this way. How can company like us develop the crypto? Yeah. Basically, there are two ways. The first one is you find something, some mistake in the code somewhere. Okay. That doesn't really happen that often. Sometimes you are lucky, again, like if it's more junior, if it's the new stuff that is on the market, like you can. We did the cryptic for Shrink Locker, I want to say 2 months ago. Then there is the second type of decryptors, which is the public-private collaboration. You get something from law enforcement. They can work with us to put together the decryptor and so on. So that is more common, but again, like, do you want to wait for it? Like, no.
You wouldn't recommend that. Okay. But and to be fair on this topic, I feel like, and that's something that we probably won't get in detail of, obvious reasons, but time as well. I feel like the stories, how decryptors were made, are potentially movies, scripts in some ways, right? They're really, really crazy stories, right? Because some of the times in some of the previous, we had some good conversations on the podcast, and I feel like a lot of the stuff is glorified and it looks like, spy movie stuff. But in this particular case, some of these stories could be really interesting. And I don't know if we're doing a talking some, but if there's any quips that you want to throw on this, I'd appreciate that you were
It's very simple. Think about what happens. So you release the decryptor. Company like Bitdefender releases the decryptor, and there are two things. The first one is, yay, the victims have access to data, don't have to pay. That's what almost everyone see, like that's the purpose of the decryptors. And it's a secondary thing, because the primary thing is you have the ransomware group that suddenly the whole operation is disrupted.
Yeah.
Who's
you
going
annihilate the...
Yeah, but who's going to blame them? All the affiliates. All the affiliates are going to say like, hey, I had 15 clients, victims. I did my work. I got inside. I spent some time inside, and all that work is wasted. Who's going to pay me?
Right.
So that's the, like, it's over 1.6 billion US dollars that we saved. The better way how to think about it, that's the money that we prevented from this ecosystem. So us not saying how we built something like this, that's part of the psyop, like the psychological operations behind.
100%.
And we've seen conversations where like the operators were like, oh, they must use quantum computers because there is like no way how else they could do this. And we are like just laughing and like, yeah, keep trying to find out.
Maybe we were using quantum computers.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I didn't deny it. I'm like,
we're not gonna. Yeah. So
I will say there is a curveball with decryptors, though, that it is something kind of seen firsthand in incidents, and then reading about it through other research. But sometimes they're skipping encryption, because if the goal's the data, I don't want to ruin my data by encrypting it at the wrong time, and then the data is then useless to the criminals also. So there's some that are out there that are just going for a smash and grab because they just want to go in fast, run searches on types of documents. Okay, this is my high value stuff, I'm out. And
that's why we don't call it encryptionware.
Yeah,
and ransomware. So
yeah.
the point of the data is the contention here, and there's money to be paid in different ways.
And there's definitely security tools out there that have been advancing. Things are getting good, and sometimes as soon as they realize I can't uninstall this, I can't shut it down, or the agent was able to block the decryption completely. That's when things get noisy, and all of a sudden you've gone to smash and grab. So it's, if I can get 500 kilobytes or a terabyte, either way, it's great because I can still hold it for ransom. So, yeah.
Any active attacks currently that are special in any way? I mean, this conversation is probably going to go old in a month or two, so I don't want to make it time specific. But what's 2025 holding for us in this space? What do you think is going to happen moving forward?
I do have one, but I will let you go first.
Okay. I will say one thing that's been interesting is, over a few times over the last few years, just research on different groups, things that are out there. I think the things that are kind of interesting to me is the amount of companies that are staying up on blogs, 100% disclosed. So to me, I'd almost be curious to find out, what's that percentage now? Are they getting 90% of, organizations that aren't paying now, or they're cutting off negotiations, or just dumping the data? So I'd be curious to find out what that percentage is of companies that are actually paying or even cooperating. And then the other thing I've also been noticing some of the blogs is they're going after the SMBs more, and they're banking on the fact that it's an overworked IT person that has 9 different hats, that can't stay up with what's going on, or they don't have the time, they don't have the tools or the budget. And so you'll see, Mike's window tint popping up on, some ransomware blog before you'll see, a giant company like a Deco or, somebody else. So that's the interesting trends I've been seeing.
That's good for me because I have kind of part of explanation why we might be seeing this. So here's the thing. We see in the news, we all talk about the big companies, big corporations, and that's one of the common myths is like, oh, they don't go after small companies because there is no money. That's not true. You have affiliates that are professionals. They are like the groups that have like really good skills and so on. They go after big targets. You are just starting.
Just go for anybody.
You go after anybody.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's a numbers game.
One of the things that we started seeing is lone wolves. So pretty much it's not ransomware as a service. It is one guy. Yeah. They just have some ransomware, knows how to attack the network. Yeah, but they don't need anyone else. They don't need anything sophisticated. They go after smaller targets and they can do the attack from beginning until the end and keep 100% of the ransom.
How does, so what can be done? What's going on in the, so of course there's, prevention, which there's tools and services and experience, and then there's remediation, and then there's law enforcement. Do you want to browse with me over these three aspects of, what's currently available, what's going on, and, what could be done? Try to give a sense of, kind of an end-to-end situation of how, how this unfolds for somebody who's, not really into the details.
I would start the opposite. Like, what are the worst things you can do? Is assume like I'm too small, I'm not interesting, I don't have sensitive data. Like that's completely unrealistic. Yeah. Or another approach, we started with this, the beginning of it is like, oh, it's only encryption, I have backups, I'm safe. And again, it's like, no.
So, and then the question is, I mean, I would imagine is there some sort of, automation as well, where you just might end up in a pool of, small entities attacked, or is there really somebody doing research on, who to attack personally? And
I think it's kind of all of the above. It's like I think Klopp was probably one of the biggest sort of wake up calls a couple of years back. They went after 2 specific 0 days, and all they did was focus on those. They did mass scanning, who's got it, and they went after those companies. And I think out of the Move It breach, it was something like 2,000 victims out of that. So the revenue generation on that, the ROI for 1 0 day is incredible. But I think there's other parts to it. It's, are you specializing in developing exploits? Do you have that kind of talent and house to do it? Or are you just going to go rely on simple phishing, malicious websites, maybe on kind of the lower end? So yeah, I think it's all over the place.
I think we should pause on this because that is important. Like one of the changes again is like 0 day attacks. The way how many people think about it is that this is the threat actor, they pick me up as a victim and they find out the way how to get inside. And we are not like, it still happens, but we are seeing like that's not how it happens in 2024, 2025.
How does it happen in 2024, 2025?
How it happens is that you start with vulnerability where you are like, this is common, there are tens of thousands of servers exposed to the internet. This is leading remote code execution. So what I'm going to do, I will build some automated scanner that is just finding all these machines that are on the internet, compromise all of them, and then you end up with like huge pool of the victims, and you just go like, so what do we have here? Go one by one. Yeah. So you are mid-market, you are like, we will not be targeted. It's more like you are using this software, you are unlucky, like 5 hours ago there was a POC and suddenly you are compromised.
100%. So what I'm trying to get here is not a fear-mongering situation, but a reality check. Especially since automation plays a role in this, and just like we're going to figure out everybody that's exposed to this, vulnerability that we could exploit currently. Because I mean, again, this is very natural for you to understand, but may not be natural for whoever's listening or watching this. But phishing takes time, may or may not work, right? A potential 0 day might be very expensive. You might not have access to it, but a common vulnerability that's available on a large scale might be an easier way to get in. So there's different rationale for getting to formulating an attack. I'm sure, somebody's going to look at that expensive 0-day because they want a particular organization or whatever. But
let me clear. I made mistake. When I say 0-day, it is not really 0-day. It's really Klopp and similar groups. They are looking for POCs. So it's the time when the POC is available until they start weaponizing it with automated attacks. At Bitdefender, we started talking about this, like raising alarm, I want to say in late 2022. And we've been seeing decrease because before it was like, so I can give you an example. Log4j, this is pretty much where it started, yeah? And we've seen like attempts at exploitation, like quick, but not that dangerous, like attempts. And the really professionally done automated attacks and so on realistically followed a month later. The same logic, and today we are down to 24 hours. Yeah. So you have POC of interest, and it will be weaponized probably by multiple groups that are trying to raise who can do it first in less than 24 hours. And I have cool statistic for you. I'm sorry. You are like, this is like, I'm passionate about it, and
you wouldn't be here if you weren't.
So
it's simple as that.
We did one investigation and we published it as a research where it was done by the book. That was the Cactus ransomware appliance exposed to the internet. That was new POC, less than 24 hours. The box was compromised. Yeah. And then again, imagine scenario like you compromise 5,000 companies, like you have huge pool of victims, but then you need to go back manually, check who it is. And like there is initial access. We have access to this box or we actually start with the ransomware lateral movement and everything inside. So now in this case that we investigated, that period was about 1 month. So again, like POC, less than 24 hours, the first compromise of that server, the actual ransomware attack start a month later. Do you know how many threat actors we found on that single server? 70. 70. And we are talking like there was a month between the POC and the attack, and it was compromised by 70 different threat actors.
Are we going to end up in a situation where, just like let's say I'm going to throw the LA fires and a couple of other situations where, the damage is so insane that, California is struggling currently to hold insurers. Are we going to end up in a situation where insurance is not going to want to pay? And there's going to be a shift.
That's another podcast.
Yeah.
You've been it for another podcast for sure.
Yeah. I think if it gets to a point where, because, there's always been sort of talk about, holding different vendors accountable for the types of patching cycles and, mandatory patching and all these different, guidelines of, best practices and stuff. And I hopefully it doesn't get to a critical point, but I know that there's just been an increase in those types of critical vulnerabilities year over year. And so there may get to that point where, it's completely untenable, but the hope is maybe a lot of those best practices will change over time and maybe it gets better, the patching, vulnerability management, all that they're exploiting.
So maybe you can actually talk about, because again, like you do have that window of opportunity, like there was vulnerability, this box is compromised, but then nothing happens for a certain period of time. So there are things that you can do with like the SOC, MDR, threat hunting, for example. Yeah. How you can tell us how does it work, because that's something that you are helping with.
Yeah, I mean, as far as for the MDR service, we're keeping an eye on a lot of different things. I know we have, different criticalities that we look at as far as for, vulnerabilities, how widespread they are, how easy they are to exploit, because there's definitely a part where you don't want to necessarily panic the herd if you don't need to, and so, you're looking at the stuff like, is there a POC out there? Is an exploit out there? Is it for sale? Has it been bought? Do we have evidence of other threat actors using it? So we kind of go through a whole checklist of figuring out, where the criticality is and where we need to start applying those countermeasures. So, a lot of times it starts for our team, it just starts from an advisory or what we call a tipper. And we've had some interesting timing on that. I remember we had a remote management tool that had a critical, 9.8 score. It was literally minutes after we sent the tipper out to the customers that we thought were affected, 2 came in with an incident. And I'm not going to dime out the name because I don't remember which one it was, and I don't want to call the wrong vendor. But you know, it was that timely to the point where like this is critical. We need to get it out. And then literally minutes later, 2 incidents kicked off from that vulnerability. But if we can get it in time, you know, a lot of that's going to include, you know, a hunt package. If we have, you know, different types of indicators, you know, whether it's behavioral or even just static, you know, a lot of times we're going to go look at those things for our MDR customers, you know, to make sure that if nothing else, we can at least rule out the potential of, you know, activity from that. So.
Gotcha.
I would say like the minimum thing is like the CISA has a list of like known exploited vulnerabilities. Like it's like the minimum you can do is keep attention to that list and make sure that you are not vulnerable to those.
Yeah.
So to your point, as a kind of a, not that we are ever going to finish the conversation on ransomware, not today, but
I wish,
but kind of a point for our conversation now. I'd like us to throw a couple of recommendations if we have any. So of course, you know, obviously, you know, have the proper solution, you know, deployed. So there's some sort of prevention. What else are we throwing at that?
Defense in depth, multi-layered security. So it's kind of annoying thing because these are best practices that are not like, hey, for 2025, I will tell you this new thing. It's like, we know this works. We know this works for a really long time, and we're still repeating the same message.
Let's repeat it.
Yeah.
100%.
So if I should give one other recommendation, that would be security operations makes a huge difference. Because, so another, I don't want to say like a marketing message that is being repeated all the time is like it takes seconds or minutes, and it doesn't. Ransomware attacks, I would say average like 2 weeks. That is the window of opportunity that you have. That's the difference between security incident, which will happen, and security breach, which is completely preventable. But you need people, you need some eyes, you need like almost all the investigations we are doing. The conclusion is like, hey, there were all the alerts, everything, like all the signs were there. No one was just looking for them. And that was like one problem. Here we go.
And it's hard to defend like stuff like that where, you know, there are vendors that are really great at patching, you know, that, you know, it's like as soon as a notice comes out, it's like within 24 to 48 hours, they already have an advisory on mitigations. Sometimes they already have a patch or a hotfix available. And, you know, you'll see these companies that 6 months later, they get hit by something that this vendor did a great job in like getting that stuff out. And it's like you ignored it at that point. You know, there's a difference between, you know, not knowing and ignorance. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow when you see that happen.
I would also say like we keep in a way talking about sophisticated ransomware threat actors, and these operations are usually not that sophisticated. Unpopular opinion, but I would say like, again, if you would follow like the basic rules, have security monitoring, have EDR, XDR, like you will have more than enough time to prevent that incident from escalating to breach. Like again, like you have 2 weeks, enough signs, you see all the red flags, and again, you just need someone who's...
That's something we've kind of recommended with customers when we've had an MDR incident sometimes is when you talk about like defenses in depth, a lot of people get bent around the axle thinking that it's tools. And a lot of times it's not, it's policies also, you know, it's like, and it comes down to, you know, that first day that, you know, I will only use my laptop for like official stuff. I'm not going to be going on gaming sites. I'm not going to gamble and on, you know, the company dime. You know, there's companies out there that allow it, and it's fine. They're going to accept the risk. But, you know, it's little things like that that help those defenses in depth. You don't necessarily have to spend $1 million on tools. It helps. But, you know, there's other stuff that's out there that, you know, just smart security policies that like, does this make sense for us to have this risk because of this thing, you know? So I think that's something that I think people need to talk about more is just the different layers and what those like defenses look like.
And unmanaged devices, you want to touch on that?
Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, since we're going to go in and open that can of worms, you know, I know the majority of incidents we've seen in the MDR space has been from unmonitored devices. So it's, you know, something as simple as making that economic decision or an operational decision not to deploy across an entire network. And I think the stat was about 70% or more of our incidents were coming from unmonitored space. So everywhere the agent was, we saw it, but anywhere it was not, completely blind. So it's something to consider, to deploy it where you can and everything. So
Then you go to pen testing, like what you see on a paper, like your asset inventory might be different than what you actually have deployed and so on. Like the recommendations we could go into, like.
So yeah, so it sounds like unfortunately ransomware is here to stay for the time being. It's as successful as ever. It's more democratized than ever in the sense that new actors with not necessarily more or less expertise, but just probably just by the sheer number of people getting involved, it's just the reality of the risk is increasing there. It doesn't have to be sophisticated.
Yeah.
It just needs to work. Apparently, there's resources and education available to be able to do our best to prevent or to manage a situation where ransomware was involved. And so I want to invite, our listeners and viewers, if they want us to, touch base or dive deeper in one of these aspects or another, we can potentially do that on a future episode. And, with that said, unless you have other things you want to throw.
One really quick pitch I want to make. So one of the projects that my team is taking care of is Bitdefender Tech Zone. And so techzone.bitdefender.com. And what we have there is that we have white paper about ransomware. And what we do with that white paper is that we keep adding, removing, changing stuff depending whatever is happening now.
So let me ask you this. So the white paper itself is a good repository that's a live creature that you always update. And what am I expected to find in it?
So we go into how the system works, what you can expect, what is initial access, and recommend more generalized recommendations like what can you do to prevent this stage of the kill chain from happening. And again, like the thing that I'm like very strict even with my team is like, we will not just keep adding more and more stuff. We really keep looking every year, like we can remove this section because it just doesn't happen. It was replaced with this thing. So it's a living document. It's driven by the research and data and investigations that we have, and we are just trying to keep it as real as possible.
That's awesome. Well, that said, Sean, Martin, thank you so much for this. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your expertise and the work you do. We'll see you guys on the next one. I appreciate it.